Hello and welcome to Marketing Global Edition with me, Jasmine Montgomery.
And me, Piers Gulden.
We should start by apologising for not putting out a podcast last week, Piers.
Yes, I'm sure the world will feel empty without it.
Well, various dramas got in the way, but we are back and ready to chat about the wonderful world of marketing.
Okay, so what has caught your eye in terms of marketing stories this week?
Well, something that I really liked the story around was it was the final video launched by a brand I happen to feel quite warmly towards, Glenfiddich, the single malt whiskey, doing something super interesting in Africa, a continent that I also feel very warmly towards.
Oh, lovely. Tell us, can you tell us more, Jasmine?
Yeah, so Glenfiddich are building 4 sustainable spring water systems in South Africa. So for many South Africans, access to clean water is not a guarantee. And these 4 springs, once complete, will bring water for life to over 2,500 people. And they've just launched a really beautiful film celebrating the opening of one of the springs in Matatiele on the Eastern Cape.
Ah, yes, I do know about this. It's part of their Glenfiddich's Challengers Cup series, which is all about celebrating the transformative power of water. And they've created a series of 3 films that explore what they call is the profound relationship between water, whiskey craftsmanship, and communities. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it makes total sense because, you know, whiskey is made from water, it's mixed with water, so there's this really sort of intrinsic link to water. So I kind of love it, but I also sort of think that in their PRing of the story, I feel like maybe Glenfiddich have been drinking too much of their own Kool-Aid, or in this case, single malt whiskey.
Oh, boom, boom. Okay, tell me more. In what way?
So one of the articles I read about it said Glenfiddich has moved beyond storytelling to real-world impact, funding and implementing the first of 4 sustainable spring water systems to support the local community.
Listen, what's wrong with that? I really like it. I think it's great. It's a brand-led initiative about a real-world difference that they're going to make in a way that is related to their product, which is whiskey. I mean, it's just like, it's a no-brainer.
So when they talk about moving beyond storytelling to real-world impact, I sort of see it the other way round. I think they haven't gone beyond storytelling to real-world impact, but in fact have done a little bit of real-world impact and spun it into some really beautiful storytelling. And it begs the question for me of how brands should do good in the world when they do it, when they choose to do it. Should they do it because it makes for a beautiful video in a way that, or some great marketing or a great ad in the way that it links back to their product? Or should they just do it because it's the right thing to do? And maybe not send in the kind of high production camera crews.
Okay, so that's today, right? So we're going to specifically talk about how brands should set about doing some good in the world, right? And whether or not brands should link the good that they do to their brand. Correct?
Right, so there are always really interesting stories about brands launching new initiatives for good. And, there's a lot of kind of public discourse about this and a lot of different ways in which people talk about this. So we often hear it called CSR, corporate social responsibility, or ESG, environmental, social and governance, although that's become a bit of a bad word or phrase in the United States. People talk about social impact, but whatever they call it, most companies today are trying to show that they make a positive impact on the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the zeitgeist of the moment. Well, is it the zeitgeist? Actually, the zeitgeist of the long-term zeitgeist at the moment is around purpose.
Yeah, everybody's talking about brand purpose. We've got to have a purpose. We've got to have something that we do that makes the world a better place. Unless you live in Trump's America, where suddenly, ESG and DEI, diversity, equality, inclusivity, and sustainability, these are all bad things, and people are refusing to buy cars if they do anything for the planet,
Yeah, but, the rest of the world does seem to be moderately interested in acting for good, don't you think?
All right, so we're going to have a little debate about just how companies should do that. Should they link CSR? We'll call it CSR for now. It's a catch-all term. It can mean everything from sort of social responsibility, to kind of your sponsorship of, good initiatives, but we'll call it CSR. Should they link CSR to their business, or is doing good a good in itself?
Okay, I have a very clear point of view here myself. So absolutely, companies should align their CSR with their business and their brand. I mean, why wouldn't you? It makes total commercial sense. It ensures that the good they are doing resonates with the realities of their brand and product, and that they're not just jumping on the bandwagon for a social cause or cause washing. And if it helps to deliver brand value, then it's going to be good for the longer term, right? More sustainable initiative than just the latest donation to charity.
Whereas I disagree and think that brands should do good for good sake, not for their own sake. We all live in the world, and we all have, both in my view, both individuals and companies, a moral obligation to help tackle the biggest issues, from poverty and hunger to things like health and addressing climate change. I think that companies have a responsibility to use their money and their voice to fix what is broken, to raise awareness for causes, and to inspire social change, not just for profit, although companies that do this well do tend to inspire consumer trust and loyalty, but not because of that, but because it's just the right thing to do.
Okay, you just used the phrase not for profit, and to me, that says charity. And companies aren't charities. They exist to make money for their stakeholders. They don't have a moral obligation to tackle the issues you feel are the most important. Sorry, shareholders first.
All right, Milton Friedman, I guess we're about to descend into an argument about shareholder capitalism versus stakeholder capitalism.
Oof, are we qualified for that?
Well, you have an MBA from Imperial. I just have a degree in fine arts.
Okay, Harvard. Nice try at being self-deprecating.
I guess, we do get asked by clients frequently to advise on their CSR and sponsorship strategies, and I think it's really because they're so often linked to brand. And I think you and I have quite different views on this in terms of what builds the most powerful brands.
Yeah. And as usual, you are a bleeding heart liberal that wants everyone to hug a tree.
Whereas you are an evil capitalist that thinks that people should make decisions on entirely commercial bases. So which of us is right?
Okay, listen, I think most companies these days have seen the light and rationalised their initiatives for good based on their brand.
Okay, can you give us an example?
Yeah, quite a few actually. So a while ago, Ernst & Young, one of the top 4 global accounting firms, looked at the places they were giving their money, and they realised they were supporting everything, everywhere, from sports to arts to education to a million other causes. So they decided to streamline their initiatives to focus in on the one thing that was really close to their business and their brand, which is numeracy literacy. Accountancy firm, numeracy literacy. So they stopped funding things like the New York City Ballet, and they focused on scholarships for maths and accountancy, and on helping businesses like fishing industry in India after the tsunami.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that
so
was a good one.
It's good for the world, it's good for the brand, and it's good for the shareholders. And there are loads of stories like this. Airbnb finding homes for Ukrainian refugees, helping people displaced by the LA wildfires, Unilever's Lifebuoy soap promoting hand washing campaigns around the world. I could go on.
Yeah, okay, but I hear that and I think, well, sure, but you know what Unilever are really promoting is people buying more soap if they're doing hand washing, campaigns. I mean, I like the ones where the company goes against the grain and actually is willing to take a hit on, to do what's right.
So do you like the Patagonia campaign that I love, Don't Buy This Jacket?
Yeah, tell me more about that one.
Okay, so Patagonia is an very well-known outdoor clothing brand, and it ran a full-page ad in the New York Times on Black Friday featuring the message, "Don't buy this jacket." So the ad aimed to raise awareness about the environmental impact of overconsumption, and it really highlighted the resources and waste involved in producing even a single piece of clothing like a jacket. So basically, they argue that everyone is making way too much stuff and buying too much stuff and contributing to the destruction of the planet, and that quality products are more environmentally sound.
Yeah, but it's still kind of an ad for jackets, isn't it? It just uses a really eye-catching, irreverent approach to doing that.
I know.
Love it for that.
I just think, yeah, I loved it. I thought it was absolutely smart, brilliant, great. Don't buy this jacket, so everyone does. Anyway, go on. Who's doing things your way?
Okay, so the trainer brand Puma, I think, is absolutely fascinating. Their previous CEO, he left in 2022, but their Puma CEO, Bjorn Gulden, he had a totally different view on CSR. So unlike so many brands that tightly align their social impact efforts to their product categories or their marketing objectives,
Hey.
Gulden, yeah, you. Gulden he actually advocated for a much more straightforward and values-driven approach. So he believed that companies should engage in CSR initiatives simply because it's the right thing to do, not necessarily because those projects directly link to the brand's product or commercial, kind of commercial returns. And I really agree that businesses have a moral obligation to contribute to social and environmental causes, regardless of whether those initiatives create immediate financial benefits. So, Puma was doing some incredible stuff, but it wasn't about, linked to trainers. So they were doing sustainable commitments, 100% renewable electricity for their operations. They were really passionate about supporting kind of human rights and social equity initiatives around things like fair pay and improving working conditions in their supply chain. They were doing sort of environmental impact. In fact, they conducted this environmental profit and loss, this environmental P&L assessment to kind of measure and reduce their ecological footprint, even if it cost them money. And I think, their approach was a much more principle-driven model where giving back was seen as a corporate duty rather than as a strategic tool.
I would argue, what is the commercial impact of their approach? I mean,
Of course
doesn't
we would.
CSR, yeah, doesn't CSR work better when it's not just a cost, but generates some measurable value, some return for the brand, for the business?
Yeah, but I think that, it depends how you look at that return. I mean, I think that being open to doing what the world needs rather than what simply serves your marketing does actually pay off. So although Puma's CSR efforts were not kind of so commercially driven in their kind of direct, attribution to marketing stuff, they still delivered results. So, Puma really strengthened its reputation as an ethical brand. They built some really cool sustainable products based on some really interesting product innovations around biodegradable sneakers, recycled fabrics, which really appealed to eco-conscious consumers. And, although those initiatives may not have had a direct kind of return on investment ROI, actually the underlying performance of the business was really sound. So they grew their revenue over 50% during Golden's tenure. So it certainly didn't compromise, financial performance of the business.
Okay, but surely that approach you've just gone through, isn't that pretty rare these days?
I think it depends slightly on where you look in the world. So one thing I think we need to take into account is kind of the fact that some of the companies we work with are in countries where it's more appropriate, actually. So I remember working with Safaricom in Kenya on the Safaricom Foundation and asking that, sort of initially kind of trying to get them to think about, aligning some of what they did to a sort of single purpose. But they really talked about the fact that, they lived in a place where, if somebody who worked for their business's uncle needed a heart operation, it's expected in somewhere like Kenya that your employer will step in and help. If the local football team needs kit, they turn to the elders in the community, they turn to companies, and that you can't streamline because it's about being a kind of a sort of safety net for your community. And I think that actually there are lots of companies. So lots of companies in the developing world, I think, behave that way because they sort of have to. But in the developed world, you do get a lot of companies that are interested in doing the right thing in the long term. So like Starbucks committing to fair trade coffee, even though that makes their supply chain a little harder, or Tom's shoes, who were giving away kind of a free pair of shoes in the developing countries for every pair that someone in a developed country buys.
That's really interesting about Tom's, actually, didn't they? Tom's had to rethink what they were doing. Weren't they accused of undermining local shoe manufacturing and retail with all their free shoes? Didn't they have a sort of a backlash of some
There
sort?
was a bit of a backlash. I mean, it's hard to do the right thing. It's not always easy and you do get flack. And, sometimes there are unintended consequences. But Tom's, because they are a business that does really believe in doing the right thing, they reevaluated their strategy. And instead of focusing on free shoes, the company now donates a third of its profits to grassroots campaigns in areas of mental health, access to opportunity, and ending gun violence. And they talk about that. They actually say in their impact report that, they learned that like giving shoes was an amazing start, but they had to kind of move away from that. So they now give impact grants, which enable their communities to do more and perhaps in a more community-led way. So they give away a third of their profits. In other words, for every, they give away $1 for every $3 they make. And they say that this is about as much as a company can give while still keeping the lights on. And I have a lot of respect for that, and as a result of all these CSR initiatives, they've helped 105 million people's lives improve, Yeah,
that's pretty impressive, actually. Okay, so we're both the companies doing good, but just in different ways. Yeah, your way is just a little bit more idealistic and airy-fairy, I'd say, than mine. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, but if more companies did it my way, Piers Gulden, we'd be living in a world that was less preoccupied with things like climate change and more able to focus on profits for its evil capitalist overlords like yourself.
Yes, you're never going to let me off the hook, but there you go.
Never, never. Okay, that is all for today. I am off to have a glass of Glenfiddich.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
See you soon.
Marketing Global Edition is sponsored by 𝐕𝐢𝐿𝐴𝐷𝐶, the ad generator for small businesses that serves you effective and affordable ads in seconds. And by 7 Brands, the international advertising and branding agency that has worked with clients around the world from Coca-Cola to Facebook.